Hi. Excuse me. Yesterday we began talking about the Spanish-American War, and we're going to continue today. Today, actually, the day the war was declared, and I'm going to play for you a clip a little bit later of John Green, John Green, discussing the beginning of the Spanish-American War, and actually most of it since it lasted for 4 months. But before we did that, continuing with the theme of the Jews' involvement in the Spanish-American War, I found online this fascinating song, which was written for the Jewish community in America in 1899 for a patriotic song about a soldier going to war. It is written in Yiddish, but I'm not going to read you the Yiddish. I'm going to read you the English and then comment. The Jewish volunteer. Look how happily the volunteers go to struggle for Cuba's freedom with sword in hand. Each just wants to make his dear fatherland proud. Not too many years later, less than 40, the term fatherland would have a very different connotation about a very different land where very different things were happening to the Jews. But at that point, to make his dear fatherland proud refers in this song to America. And there was also among them a Jew. He faced his battle there, brave as a hero. He won the first battle completely. The Jew was the best on the battlefield. They made him an officer. Quickly send a telegram to my old mother. Write that her dear son triumphed on the battlefield, and the undersigned will be made happy. And following his nature, the Jew fought like a hero. The second battle was worse. Everyone was tired. Beaten by the Spanish, we were driven off. Here came the brave young Jew straight away, shouting, "Children, come with me." He deceived the enemy and saved the fatherland. He did beat the enemy this time too. Suddenly a cannonball met him and tore up his hand. He was taken very weak to the hospital. He lay in the hospital grievously wounded. He cut off his left hand. Now he hears the captain cry, "We are in danger. Children, save your fatherland." He ran into battle forgetting his pain. He ran with gusto to save his fatherland. Suddenly he feels something is burning him. Oh, his heart feels terrible. A bullet found its way straight to his breast. Quickly send a telegram to my old mother. Write her that here her dear son lies on the battlefield. And if you do, the undersigned will be made happy. And the Jew did as he ought. He died like a hero. Just to read that last stanza in the original Yiddish. Schnell schickt das Telegramm zu mein alter Mama. Schreibt ihr, als ihr lieber Sohn liegt auf dem Schlachtfeld. Wie die Unterdrückte wenn sein begleicht, und der Jid hat seins getan, gestorben wie ein Held. So, it's interesting that there is nothing about God or actual Judaism here, only about Jews and the heroism of Jews. And this is an interesting point to make, which was that most of the Jews at the time in America, certainly those who were going to go to war, were not particularly religious, and they were motivated much more by a sense of Americanism than a sense of Judaism. The song starts with a call for the volunteers to go to, or rather, a description of the volunteers going with Simcha in order to fight for Cuba's freedom, which is not exactly for even the Jews. It's for some universal sense of human struggle. And it just starts zu kämpfen für Cuba's Freiheit mit dem Schwert in Hand. Die Volontieren sehr nur wie freilich gehen sie. Okay, so they went as happily to this war. And as you will hear perhaps from John Green or in others, John Hayes, who was the I believe Secretary of State for at the time of this Spanish-American War, his famous time calling it a splendid little war, which sounds horrible to us today. It was horrible back then too, but not as horrible as it would be today. Back then, there was still the sense that there was such concept as a splendid little war. I believe that even Theodore Roosevelt called it a bully war. Bully was this term for a geschmack, great thing to enjoy. And this was the era of American imperialism. It should be not so hard to spell, but we're going to write it down anyway. when Americans were imperialists. Imperialism. Yeah. Now, you might think imperialism comes from the word empire, as in the British Empire. What does that do with Americans? So the answer is that imperialism and empire do not have to do with necessarily having a king or queen or emperor or empress. It's when a country feels that a destiny or a drive or even just a determination to push beyond its borders and conquer lands which have nothing to do with its own original nationality and its own original country. And the British were famous for having an empire. Even to this day, there's some remnants of the empire because they conquered lands beyond the British Isles. It's all over the world. There's a famous statement that is still probably true, actually, that the sun never sets on the British Empire. Just that today's British Empire consists of a few islands and holdings across the globe, not exactly large amounts of land like it once did with India, Australia, New Zealand, Egypt, Palestine, now Israel, and many countries in Africa, like South Africa, belonging to the British Empire. America at this time had a sense of empire as well. And the Spanish American, actually America throughout the 19th century, have been expanding into areas in which people of its nationality did not live. They expanded westward. But there was this concept at the time called the manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is something you should remember. Manifest means something, M-A-N-I-F-E-S-T. Manifest destiny was the sense that America was meant to control from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and that we had some destiny to control that land. In other words, what that really meant was that white Europeans should control that land because there were lots of Native Americans there who obviously were not part of the greater plan of manifest destiny, except in the sense that we could bring to them, if they cooperated, enlightenment, education, advancement, humanity, and so on and so forth. They didn't see it that way, but we saw it that way. And then America, when it reached from sea to shining sea, sea to shining sea. So then they decided we can go further and bring the glory of American values, ideals, and leadership to the entire world. And the Spanish-American War expanded American territory beyond the confines of the North American continent, and even beyond Hawaii, which was annexed, added on to the United States, not as a state, became a state 60 some odd years later, but became a territory of the United States during the Spanish-American War, to the Philippines, way far on the other side of the globe, and here closer to home to Cuba, which they promised not to make part of the United States, but it became under heavy United States influence, and in fact, to this day, there is a strong United States military base on the island of Cuba, even though the rest of Cuba is a communist country, which is an enemy to the United States. Because since that time, when Cuba had this close relationship with the United States, they had this type of, they were there with their military to make sure things went the way we wanted and not the way they wanted. And that's when the United States also took over Puerto Rico. And it started a few layers digging the Panama Canal, which required taking over an area from Panama. So all this was American imperialism, which the Americans believed was grounded in something positive, vaguely something noble about the American character, American master plan or destiny for the world. And the beginning of the process, and most of it took place actually during the Spanish-American War, even though it was only a few months long. Now, when you watch the video, you'll see that John Green reads McKinley's proposals to Congress from today, 122 years ago, as to what why they should go to war. And it's fascinating because there's a poster a little bit earlier in the John Green sequence about going to war in order to bring this humanity and this great great mission to the world. And then John Green makes a specific crack, which is true, which I want you to find. It's not so hard, and write it down and explain, and perhaps give me a little bit or two analysis of McKinley's declaration of war. Without any further ado.
distant waters. In 1890, Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan published The Influence of Sea Power Upon History and argued that to be a great power, like Great Britain, the U.S. needed to control the seas and dominate international commerce. Tied into this push to become a maritime power was the obsession with building a canal through Central America, and eventually the U.S. decided that it should be built in Panama because, you know, how else are we going to get malaria? In order to protect this canal, we would need a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. Sorry, I just wanted to get the palindrome in there somewhere. No, we would actually need much more than a man and a plan. We would need ships, and in order to have a functioning two-ocean navy, we would need colonies. Why? Because the steamships at the time were powered by coal, and in order to refuel, they needed coal depots. I mean, I suppose we could have, rented harbor space, but why rent when you can conquer? Also, nationalism and the accompanying pride in one's country was a worldwide phenomenon to which the U.S. was not immune. I mean, it's no accident that the 1890s saw Americans begin to recite the Pledge of Allegiance and celebrate Flag Day. And what better way to instill national pride than by flying the stars and stripes over Guam. So pre-Civil War attempts to expand beyond what we now know as the continental United States included our efforts to annex Canada, which were sadly unsuccessful, and also filibustering, which before it meant a senator talking until he or she had to stop to pee, was a thing where we tried to take over Central America to spread slavery. But the idea of taking Cuba persisted into the late 19th century because it is close and also beautiful. The Grant administration wanted to annex it and the Dominican Republic, but Congress demurred. But we did succeed in purchasing Canada's tail. You can see how I feel about that. To be fair, discovery of gold in the Yukon made Seward's icebox seem like less of a Seward's folly, and it did provide coaling stations in the Pacific. But we could have had rum and Caribbean beaches. Oh, Stan, all this talk about how much I hate Alaska has me overheated. I gotta take off my shirt. Oh, my life. So hard to take off a shirt dramatically. I'm angry! Anyway, coal stations in the Pacific were important because in 1854 we opened Japan to American trade by sending a flotilla of threatening black ships under Matthew Perry. No, Stan, not that Matthew Perry. You know better. By far America's best piece of imperial business before 1898 was Hawaii. I like oil and gold as much as the next guy, but Hawaii has pineapples and also sugar, which were grown on American-owned plantations by Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and native workers. Treaties between the U.S. and Hawaiian governments exempted this sugar from tariffs, and America also had established a naval base at Pearl Harbor, which seemed like a really good idea. Then. We eventually annexed Hawaii in 1898, and this meant that it could eventually become a state, which it did in 1959, 2 years before Barack Obama was born in Kenya. And this leads us nicely to the high tide of American imperialism, the Spanish-American-Cuban-Filipino War. The war started out because native Cubans were revolting against Spain, which was holding on to Cuba for dear life as the remnant of a once great empire. The Cubans' fight for independence was brutal. 95,000 Cubans died from disease and malnutrition after Spanish General Valeriano Weiler herded Cubans into concentration camps. For this, Weiler was called Butcher in the American Yellow Press, which sold a lot of newspapers on the backs of stories about his atrocities. And at last we come to President William McKinley, who responded cautiously with a demand that Spain get out of Cuba or face war. Now, Spain knew that it couldn't win a war with the U.S., but as George Herring put it, they preferred the honor of war to the ignominy of surrender. Let that be a lesson to you. Always choose ignominy. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are simple. I guess the author of the mystery document, I'm either right or I get shocked. All right, let's see what we got today. With such a conflict waged for years in an island so near us and with which our people have such trade and business relations, when the lives and liberty of our own citizens are in constant danger and their property destroyed and themselves ruined, where our trading vessels are liable to seizure and are seized at our very doorstep by warships of a foreign nation, the expeditions of filibustering that we are powerless to prevent altogether, all these and others that I need not mention, with the resulting strained relations, are a constant menace to our peace, and compel us to keep on a semi-war footing with a nation with which we are at peace. Thank you, Stan. This is obviously President William McKinley's war message to Congress. You can tell it's a war message because it includes the word peace more than the word war. By the way, it's commonly thought that President McKinley asked Congress for a declaration of war. He didn't. He let Congress take the lead. That's the only time that's ever happened in all of American history, which would be more impressive if we had declared war more than 5 times. So the document shows us that, at least according to McKinley, we officially went to war for American peace of mind and to end economic uncertainty. It was not to gain territory, at least not in Cuba. How do we know? Because Congress also passed the Teller Amendment, which forswore any U.S. annexation of Cuba, perhaps because representatives of the U.S. sugar industry, like Colorado Senator Henry Teller, feared competition from sugar produced in an American Cuba. Or maybe not, but probably so. Also not the cause of the war was the sinking of the USS Maine. The battleship, which had been in Havana's harbor to protect American interests, sank after an explosion on February 15, 1898, killing 266 sailors. Now, most historians chalk up the sinking to an internal explosion and not to Spanish sabotage, but that didn't stop Americans from blaming the Spanish with their memorable meme, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." Let's go to the thought bubble. The actual war was one of the most successful in U.S. history, especially if you measure success by brevity and relative paucity of deaths. Secretary of State John Hay called it a splendid little war, and in many ways it was. Fighting lasted about 4 months, and fewer than 400 Americans were killed in combat, although 5,000 died of, wait for it, disease. Stupid disease, always ruining everything. There weren't a ton of battles, but those that happened got an inordinate amount of press coverage, like the July attack on San Juan Hill at the Cuban city of Santiago, led by future President Theodore Roosevelt. While it was a successful battle, the real significance is that it furthered Roosevelt's career. He returned a hero, promptly became governor of New York, and by 1900 was McKinley's vice president, which was a good job to have, because McKinley would eventually be assassinated. A more important battle was that of Manila Bay, in which Commodore George Dewey destroyed a tiny Spanish fleet and took the Philippines. This battle took place in May of 1898, well before the attack on Cuba, which strongly suggests that a war that was supposedly about supporting Cuban independence was really about something else. And what was that something else? Oh, right, a territorial empire. As a result of the war, the U.S. got a bunch of new territories, notably the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. We also used the war as an opportunity to annex Hawaii to protect our ships that would be steaming toward the Philippines. We didn't annex Cuba, but we didn't let it become completely independent either. The Platt Amendment in the Cuban Constitution authorized American military intervention whenever it saw fit and gave us a permanent lease.
I wanted to mention one other thing before we end for today. Today is Yom HaShoah, and obviously we've been learning in the 8th grade, Shamua learning 8th grade, extensive about the Shoah. But it's interesting, I could not find any hint to this, but I have a hypothesis, which since I could not find a hint, that is based sheerly in my conjecture and not in fact at all. But I'm going to share it anyway, which is that since the 1930s, till World War II, public enemy numero uno, that means in Spanish number one, for the Jews was Spain, because of the devastation which the expulsion from Spain in 1492 wrought on world Jewry. Not just the Jews in Spain suffered, but Jews all over the world suffer, Spain and Portugal. As a result, and the Inquisition followed them to the New World, to North America, South and North America. So my theory is that, again, my hypothesis with no sound basis in fact, but so what? Stop me from saying it, is that the volunteerism of the American Jewish public may have had something to do with the revenge now to be taken after 400 long years on Spain and the Spanish Empire.